He steps in close, slaps her butt hard, and snarls, "Trash like you doesn't deserve a real Christmas." The whole pack of rich kids erupts in mocking laughter, phones out, filming up close, ready to turn her into a viral humiliation across the entire school. They thought she was just easy prey, helpless and weak, but in a single heartbeat, everything flips. The sickening crack of bone echoes through the cold air. The ringleader drops to his knees, face drained of color, clutching a wrist that looks like it's about to snap off. The laughter dies instantly. The group stands frozen. Only deadly silence remains. They messed with the wrong person. What could make a girl who looks completely harmless take down her bully in the blink of an eye? And the price they end up paying is far more terrifying than they ever imagined. Stay until the very end to watch them beg for mercy on their knees. Comment below right now. If it were you, what would you do to bullies like these? And hit like if you can't stand people like them.
The parking lot of St. Jude Preparatory Academy didn't look like a high school. It looked like a luxury car dealership on a Saturday morning. Polished asphalt, neat rows of Range Rovers, BMWs, and Porsches shimmering under the weak, washed-out winter sun of Massachusetts. It was December. The first flakes of snow drifted down like quiet insults, dusting windshields that cost more than most families make in a year. A sea of privilege, a velvet rope whirled. And in the middle of it, Maya River stood out like a drop of ink in a glass of milk. 17 years old, skin the color of deep obsidian, hair braided tight to her scalp in rows of military precision, a plain navy winter coat, generic, worn, too thin for this kind of cold. She waited near the bus stop sign at the edge of the lot while everyone else clustered in little circles, laughing, gossiping, scrolling, letting their expensive breath turn into white clouds. Maya stood alone. Her dark eyes scanned the perimeter with the detached focus of a watchman. Scholarship kid, outsider, the one they invited into the castle so they could remind her every day she didn't belong. Not always with words, sometimes with looks, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with the kind of jokes that weren't jokes at all, the kind that said, without saying it, "You're tolerated, not equal." Then the low, guttural roar shattered the quiet. Heads snapped around as a massive lifted GMC Sierra tore around a corner, a beast of black chrome and aggression taking up 2 lanes like rules didn't apply to it. Behind the wheel sat Bryce Halston, 18, crowned prince of St. Jude. Classic blonde hair, varsity captain jacket draped over broad shoulders, a jawline that screamed old money, the idol everyone worshipped and feared. And under that polished exterior, a desperate hunger for control. Bryce saw Maya by the curb. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. Next to her, a depression in the asphalt had filled with slushy, freezing mud, an ugly little trap left behind by the early snowfall. Bryce gunned the engine. The diesel motor screamed as he swerved toward the curb. The intention wasn't subtle. He would buzz her, force her to jump, make her stumble, send her sprawling into that mud so the whole lot could laugh and pretend it was harmless. An unspoken tradition, a welcome ceremony for scholarship students who dared to step into their sanctuary. His friends in the passenger seats laughed, already tasting the splash. The truck barreled toward her, a 2-ton metal predator closing in for the kill. Any normal teenager would have flinched, screamed, scrambled back, covered their face. Maya Rivers didn't blink. She didn't move. She stayed rooted to the spot, an unyielding statue in the chaos. Her eyes locked onto the chrome grille, then lifted, piercing the tinted windshield, staring straight at the driver. She judged the trajectory, the speed, the distance with a calm so cold it felt unreal. Panic flashed in Bryce's eyes. This wasn't in the script. She was supposed to jump. She was supposed to be scared. Why wasn't she scared? At the last possible second,
Fear overtook arrogance. Bryce slammed the brakes. Tires locked. Rubber screamed. The truck skidded on a patch of black ice, shuddering violently, the rear end fishtailing before it stopped, just inches from Maya's knees. Heat from the engine block washed over her face. She didn't flinch. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire parking lot froze. Students stopped mid-sentence, breath turning to vapor in the air, waiting for the explosion, the fight, the moment that would put her back in her place. Bryce threw the door open and jumped out, face flushed deep crimson, not from the cold, but from the humiliation of being the first one to panic. He stormed around the front of the truck, expensive boots crunching over snow, voice loud enough to reclaim his throne. "Are you crazy?" he bellowed, stomping through slush. He loomed over her, using his height like a weapon. "Are you blind or just stupid? I could have flattened you. You move when I'm coming through. That's how it works here." How it works here. Not a warning, a rule, a law of the rotten little kingdom. Maya slowly raised her hand and brushed a single snowflake off her shoulder, slow, deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. She glanced at the bumper, then lifted her gaze to meet Bryce's furious eyes. "The minimum safe braking distance for a vehicle in this weight class at 20 miles per hour is about 3 meters, she said. Her voice was calm, level, clinical, a razor blade in the winter air. "Your driving skills are substandard." A ripple of shock ran through the onlookers. Someone choked back a laugh. Bryce froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The laughter hit him like a physical blow, because it wasn't just a laugh. It was the sound of his authority cracking. He could feel the eyes of the entire school burning into his back. His fists clenched. He stepped closer, invading her space, lowering his voice into a venomous growl meant for her alone. "You think you're smart?" he hissed, blue eyes dark with a promise of violence. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Then he turned on his heel, stormed back to the truck, and slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. The engine roared. He peeled out of the lot, tires spinning aggressively, leaving a cloud of black exhaust like a dirty signature across the snow. Maya's eyes tracked the departing truck, memorizing the license plate, noting the uneven tread on the rear left tire. No trembling, no panic, no fear. Just the cold, calculated assessment of a soldier observing an enemy combatant. And under the freezing air, a question hung like a hook. When a rotten system protects the wealthy, what does it do when the outsider refuses to bow and starts collecting evidence instead?
Bryce Halston didn't wait long to retaliate. The humiliation in the parking lot didn't fade. It metastasized overnight, turning wounded pride into a cold, calculated need to destroy something, anything that belonged to Maya Rivers. By the time the sun rose over St. Jude's manicured athletic fields, the next morning's trap was already set. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise, like a knife left on the counter, waiting for a hand to find it. The girls' locker room smelled like lavender body spray and expensive shampoo, a sanctuary of privilege where the daughters of CEOs and politicians compared Aspen ski weeks and Hampton's plans like they were discussing weather. When Maya walked in, the chatter died on impact. The silence was heavy, suffocating, deliberate, eyes flicking from her face to the metal row of lockers like they were watching a punchline arrive. Maya didn't react. She moved with a neutral expression straight to locker 402. Today was the semester qualifier for the 5K run, 30% of the grade, the kind of fair measurement that always seemed to hit scholarship kids the hardest. She spun the combination dial. The lock clicked. She pulled the handle. The door swung open with a screech that echoed through the room like it wanted witnesses. Inside was wreckage. Her running shoes weren't just damaged, they were eviscerated, soles slashed from heel to toe, uppers shredded into ribbons, laces cut into inch-long confetti. Violent vandalism, angry and intimate. And then the real message, the part meant to crawl under her skin, painted across the inside of the locker door in dripping, jagged red letters. Go run back to the ghetto. A few girls giggled behind her, nervous and cruel. Others looked away, complicit in their silence. Was this supposed to be funny? Was the joke that she existed? 5 minutes to the whistle, ladies. Let's move. Coach Donovan's voice boomed from the hallway. He stepped into the doorway, blowing his silver whistle, a man who measured his worth in trophies and had little patience for anything else. He saw the crowd gathered around Maya, saw the open locker, saw the hateful red slur. Maya, he barked, bored, irritated, if you're not on the track in 3 minutes, it's an automatic failure. I don't care about your drama. I care about my schedule. That was St. Jude in one sentence, the system protecting its own with a shrug. Investigating a hate message meant paperwork, donors, discomfort. Failing a scholarship student, administrative efficiency. Bryce, lurking somewhere outside near the bleachers, was counting on tears. He was waiting for the sprint to the principal's office, the trembling voice, the story he could twist into weakness. Maya stood in front of the open locker while the red paint screamed at her, demanding shame, demanding she shrink. She didn't give it that satisfaction. She reached into her duffel bag, bypassed the ruined shoes, and pulled out a first aid kit like she was about to treat a wound instead of a humiliation. She sat on the wooden bench and took out a roll of heavy-duty black duct tape. Surgical, calm. She slid her feet into the shredded remains of her sneakers, soles flapping uselessly, fabric hanging in tatters, and she began to wrap, tight around the instep to clamp the sole down, tighter around the ankle for stability, binding the toe box together, layer by layer, reconstructing function out of sabotage. The result looked ugly. Black bricks stropped to her feet, but ugly wasn't the point. Useful was. She stood up, slammed a locker door shut over the slur, and walked out without looking at the girls who giggled, the smell of adhesive trailing behind her like a warning. Outside, the air bit hard. The track was lined with students waiting for the next period, their breath blooming into pale clouds. Up in the bleachers, Bryce sat like a king on a cold throne, flanked by his posse, leaning forward as Maya emerged. He nudged a friend and pointed at her feet, laughing with that cruel little grin that tried to make the world agree with him. "Look at that," he said. "Trash wearing trash." The other runners, dressed in the newest Nike Vaporflies and glossy compression gear, gave Maya a wide berth, like proximity might stain them. "On your marks," Coach Donovan shouted. "Get set, go!" The pistol cracked, sharp as a gunshot, and the pack surged forward. Maya started in the middle. The duct tape restricted the natural flex of her foot. Friction burned her skin. Every step landed like a blunt impact, jarring her shins. Pain is just information, she told herself. Process it, ignore it, keep moving. By the first mile, the pack thinned. Maya found a piston rhythm, steady, relentless, and began passing the girls who'd giggled in the locker room. They were already gasping, their expensive gear unable to compensate for soft discipline. By the second mile, she was in the top 3. Bryce's grin started to fade. He sat up straighter, the joke slipping out of his hands. By the third mile, Maya was alone at the front, black tape flashing like a blur, legs pumping with the horsepower of a trained soldier. She fed the red paint in her locker into the furnace of her resolve. She imagined Bryce's smirk. She imagined the system's shrug. She turned it all into fuel. She hit the finish line in a sprint, chest breaking the tape like she was cutting through a trap. Coach Donovan stared at his stopwatch, clicked it, then clicked it again, frowning like numbers were betraying him. 18 minutes, 40 seconds, he announced. That's a new school record. The silence that followed wasn't the locker room silence of cruelty. This was the silence of awe. Maya bent down, grabbed the edge of the duct tape on her left shoe, and ripped it off in one motion. The shredded sneaker fell apart immediately. She left the ruined shoes right there on the finish line, a pile of trash that had just beaten the best money could buy, and lifted her eyes to the bleachers.
She found Bryce in the crowd. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face had gone pale, jaw set hard, hands gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. He'd destroyed her gear, insulted her race, tried to grind her dignity into the mud, and she answered with a record. Physical sabotage wouldn't work, pain wouldn't work, property wouldn't work. So what was left for a boy like him, raised inside a rotten system that protected the wealthy and punished the inconvenient? He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, eyes fixed on Maya standing tall on the track like a statue that refused to fall. "Get the invite ready," he whispered into the receiver. "We need to change the game." Trap set. Again.
The St. Jude Auditorium wasn't a schoolroom. It was a cathedral built for ego, pretending to teach humility. Vaulted ceilings, mahogany walls, a 30-foot Christmas tree glittering with crystal ornaments that probably cost more than a sensible car. Every velvet seat was packed. Blazers, plaid skirts, polished smiles, buzzing with that end-of-semester hunger for spectacle. And on stage, Bryce Houston stood behind the podium like a televangelist who'd memorized the rhythm of applause. Tailored navy suit, perfect hair, a smile so practiced it could have been stitched on. Beside him, a table stacked with wrapped gifts, the Student Council's holiday giving initiative, the kind of giving that likes an audience. Maya Rivers sat in the back row, posture rigid, eyes steady. She watched Bryce the way you'd watch a sniper in a bell tower, quiet, detached, counting angles. She knew the parking lot embarrassment hadn't faded. The track record hadn't broken him. It had only bruised the part of him that needed worship. Bryce leaned into the microphone and let his voice roll out smooth as silk. "Christmas is a time for reflection," he said, pausing so the teachers could nod on cue. "A time for us, the fortunate ones, to look out for those who struggle." Then he smiled wider, like he was about to perform a miracle. "Sometimes new family members arrive with less than we're accustomed to." His eyes swept the crowd and locked onto the back row, predators sighting movement in the brush. "Maya Rivers," he said, bright and loud, "would you please join me on stage?" The spotlight swung like a searchlight and pinned her in place. Whispers broke out instantly. The charity case, the scholarship girl, the one they'd tried to turn into a joke. Was this supposed to be kindness or a public execution dressed in tinsel? Maya stood, face blank. No panic, no hesitation. In a trap, you don't freeze, you walk in, on your terms. She moved down the aisle and up the steps while the whole room leaned forward, hungry. Bryce met her with a grin that never touched his eyes. "We noticed your equipment issues yesterday," he said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It broke our hearts. No student at St. Jude should have to tape their shoes together like a refugee." He let the word hang there, polished and cruel. "So the Student Council took up a collection." He gestured to a large box wrapped in shimmering gold paper, crowned with a massive red bow. Beautiful, expensive, theatrical. "Go ahead," he urged, stepping back as if granting her the spotlight. "Open it. It's exactly what someone of your background deserves." Background. That little word, soft as velvet, sharp as a blade. Trap set. Maya pulled the ribbon. The paper slid away. She lifted the lid, and the smell hit first. Sour, fermented, rot and mildew like someone had bottled humiliation overnight. Inside, there were no new sneakers, no winter coat, just garbage, blackened banana peels, crushed soda cans, and on top, a heap of stained, moth-eaten underwear and a T-shirt with the word trash scrawled in marker. For one heartbeat, the auditorium went silent, like even the building was embarrassed. Then Bryce let out a short laugh, a signal flare. The laughter erupted, front row to back row, 500 kids howling like they'd been given permission to be monsters. Bryce leaned into the mic and murmured loud enough for the first rows to drink it in. "Fits you perfectly, doesn't it?" Was this charity or just racism with gift wrap?
Maya didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't perform the tears they were waiting for. She looked into the box, reached past the filth like it was nothing, and picked up the microphone Bryce had left at the podium. The feedback whine sliced through the laughter and froze the room mid-breath. Maya turned toward Bryce. Her expression wasn't rage. It was pity, clean, quiet, devastating. "Thank you, Bryce," she said, voice calm, amplified, carrying through the cathedral like a verdict. "It's rare to see someone give away things that are so personal to them." Confusion flickered across his face. "What?" he snapped, suddenly off script. Maya stepped closer, just enough to invade his space and force him back half a step. She didn't point at his face. She pointed at his left wrist, where the gold watch caught the stage lights like a spotlight of its own. "However," she continued, her tone hardening into steel, "I think you should keep your money. You need it more than I do." She turned to the audience, then back to the watch. "That Rolex Submariner you've been flashing all semester?" Her voice went clinical, like a coroner reading an autopsy. "The second hand ticks. It doesn't sweep." He instinctively covered it, too late. Maya didn't stop, and the font on the dial has bleeding edges. "That is a grade 3 replica. Street value, $50. The words didn't sound like an insult. They sounded like measurement, like fact, like truth dropped on marble. The room shifted. You could feel it. Eyes jumped from the watch to Bryce's face, from Bryce's face to the rumors about his father's business, the whispers everyone pretended they weren't spreading, the desperate need for approval, the way he'd tried to buy loyalty with cruelty. It clicked into place with a thick little snap. The golden prince wasn't gold. He was paint. Maya looked him dead in the eye. "Rich people don't wear fake watches, Bryce. People who are broke and trying to hide it do. So please, take your trash back. You might need to sell the box for gas money." Sarcasm, cold and precise. And the worst part, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room did it for her. Bryce's smile shattered. "You liar!" he screamed, voice cracking, suddenly high and ugly. The benevolent leader mask slid off, revealing the cornered animal underneath. "Shut up! Shut your mouth!" He lunged, fist drawing back like he could punch reality into silence, right there on center stage. "Mr. Houston," the principal roared from the side. Two male teachers sprinted in and grabbed Bryce by the arms, just as he reached Maya. He thrashed, face purple, spitting threats he couldn't take back, snapping for the slur he wanted to say out loud but couldn't afford. The rotten system loved him until he embarrassed it in public. Maya didn't move. She held the microphone steady, watching him struggle like a scientist, observing a predictable reaction. "Truth is not an insult, Bryce," she said, voice final. Then she placed the microphone back on the podium beside the box of garbage, like she was returning property after a search. She turned and walked off the stage, back straight, steps measured, no victory dance, no smile. Behind her, Bryce kept screaming while faculty dragged him away, and the student body sat frozen in stunned silence. The kind of silence happens when the joke dies and everyone realizes what they laughed at. As Maya pushed through the auditorium doors into the cold air, she didn't celebrate. She checked her surroundings. She knew what came next. When you corner a rat, it doesn't surrender. It bites. And Bryce Houston, humiliated, exposed, watched, was done playing holiday games. He was about to start hunting.
St. Jude wrapped itself in gold ribbon and holly like decor could disinfect a rotten soul. The hallways looked festive. The atmosphere didn't. After the auditorium incident, the school split down the middle. Half the kids stared at Maya Rivers like she was a problem that wouldn't go away, and the other half stared like she was a warning sign. The scholarship girl, the black girl, the one who embarrassed the golden boy in public. And in a place like this, you don't win. You just become a target with better lighting. 3 days before Christmas, Bryce Houston caught her in the chemistry lab like a scene he'd blocked out in advance. No entourage, no laughing crew. Just Bryce alone, tie loosened, hair slightly off, face tired in that curated way rich kids do when they want sympathy without surrender. "Maya," he said softly, almost like her name tasted humble. She stopped and put her back to the lockers, because you don't turn your back on a predator just because it learned to whisper. Bryce lifted his hands like he was harmless. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here to apologize." Then he leaned in, dropping his voice so anyone passing by would have to lean closer, because a whisper always sounds like truth when the room is quiet enough. "You were right about the watch," he confessed, like confession was a costume he could put on for the season. "My dad's company, it's under investigation. Assets frozen." He swallowed, eyes flicking down, playing the part of a boy cracking under pressure. "I took it out on you because I was scared. It wasn't right." To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like vulnerability. To Maya, it looked like a shark learning how to smile without showing its teeth, because the rage was still there. It was just wearing a tie now. Then he pulled out a white gift box, clean edges, innocent color, the kind of box that screams, "I'm the good guy," before you even lift the lid. "The senior bonfire is tomorrow night at the lake. Tradition. No teachers, just us." He paused for effect, like he was giving her a chance to breathe. "I want you to come. I want everyone to see we're cool, that I'm not—" He let the sentence hang, waiting for her to fill in the word that would absolve him. "That I'm not the bad guy." He nudged the box toward her. "Wear this. It's the theme. Everyone's in costume. If you show up in regular clothes, you'll stand out." Stand out, like she hadn't been standing out since the day she walked into St. Jude with the wrong zip code on her skin. "Just trust me," he added, like trust was something he had spent months trying to bury. Maya's instincts screamed. This wasn't an invitation, it was bait with a bow on it. But she also knew the rule at a school like this. If you run every time they set a trap, they'll call you weak. If you walk in, they'll call you lucky. Either way, they call you something. So she took the box, calm and unreadable. "I'll be there," she said. Bryce smiled, thin, sharp, relieved, like a man watching the first domino wobble. "Good," he whispered. "See you at the fire." And the way he said it made it sound less like a party and more like a sentence. That night, in her small, rented apartment, no mahogany walls, no velvet seats, no audience, Maya opened the box. Fabric slid out. Not a dress, not a costume meant to make her blend in. It was a court jester outfit, oversized and ridiculous, complete with bells and a hat designed to turn her into a walking punchline. Because that's how bullies do charity. They give you a spotlight, then hand you a costume that makes you the joke. And the cruel part? They'll swear it's all in good fun. They'll laugh like laughter makes it harmless. They'll film it like humiliation is content. Maya didn't scream, didn't tear it apart, didn't do the performance they were hungry for. She walked to the trash can and dropped the costume in like it was spoiled food. Because she wasn't walking into their bonfire dressed as their clown. She would go, but she'd go wearing her own clothes, her own face, her own spine. Then she sat in her mirror and began working her braids with steady hands, the way you do when you're turning fear into preparation. From a small black case, she took out a micro-recording device, no bigger than a grain of rice. She wove it deep into the braid behind her left ear, hidden in the dark strands like a secret tucked under armor. One tap, a tiny blink in the reflection. Recording, active. She held her own gaze in the mirror for a long second. The girl looking back wasn't begging to belong. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She was walking into the lion's den with her eyes open, because sometimes the only way to beat a bully is to let them talk long enough, to hang themselves with their own words.
The senior bonfire at St. Jude wasn't some cozy tradition. It was an illegal party squatting in the woods where rich kids play accidents on purpose and call it youth. Firelight clawed at the treetops. Bass rattled the pines like it wanted to crack them. Breath turned to smoke. The air stank of burning wood, weed, and vodka expensive enough to make people pretend it wasn't poison. And right through that staged chaos walked Maya Rivers in jeans and a heavy wool coat, calm in a way that makes drunk boys uncomfortable, because calm doesn't giggle on command. Bryce Houston waited where boys like Bryce always wait, close enough to the fire to look important, far enough from consequences to feel safe.
He sat on a cooler like it was a throne, flanked by Brock Renner and Jace Mallory, two football bodies with borrowed courage and one lifelong script. Relax, it's just a joke. Bryce saw Maya without the jester costume and didn't pout. He smiled, dark, certain. The costume was never the point. One whisper, one lazy nod. Brock's hand moved like he was flicking a light switch. Trap set. Maya stepped under the big oak, party entrance, witness stand, execution tree, and heard a tiny snap overhead. Rope, tension, release. Then the world turned to ice. A suspended bucket tipped, dumping freezing water mixed with cheap beer straight onto her like a baptism for the poor. Music died instantly. Chatter collapsed. The crowd went silent in that ritual way. Silent so they can watch you properly. Bryce strolled over with a red cup, wearing fake concern like a Santa beard. "Oh no," he said, sweet with sarcasm. "Looks like a prank went wrong." He scanned her like she was a mess he owned. "You'll freeze out here." And then, like a generous little prince, he snapped his fingers. Jace tossed a bundle of red fabric into the mud at her feet, an insult wrapped in velvet. "Lucky for you," Bryce smirked. "Backup outfit. Put it on or freeze." The crowd laughed, not because it was funny, because laughter is how cowards sign their names to cruelty without using ink. Maya looked down, a cheap, tiny Santa costume designed to turn her into a video clip, a spectacle, a charity case with legs. And the boys watched like they were waiting for the exact moment she broke, because they needed her to break. That's the whole business model. Maya didn't give them tears. She picked it up, walked into the changing tent, and changed in silence, because survival doesn't consult pride when your clothes are soaked and the air is biting. She stepped back out, and the woods erupted. Whistles, call cats, that ugly chorus that thinks humiliation is flirtation when the victim is the right kind of girl. Bryce lifted his phone and started recording, grinning like he'd just filmed something historic. Look at her, trying to fit in. Then he stepped into her path, blocking her from the fire like he owned heat itself. Brock and Jace drifted behind her, closing the circle. Isn't that how it always goes? Isolate, surround, make sure the system is too far away to hear you. Bryce leaned in, breath sour with alcohol and entitlement, and reached toward her like her body was part of the joke, like consent was something other people get to have. And that's when the performance ended. Not with a scream, not with a plea, with a click, like a safety coming off. Maya's hand shot up and locked his wrist in place, clean, fast, absolute. Bryce laughed at first because boys like him laugh when they still believe consequences are mythology. Then the laugh choked when he realized he couldn't move. The air shifted, the circle tightened, and then flinched. Brock lunged in, all brute confidence, and went down hard. Jace swung next, clumsy and huge, and Maya slipped inside it like she'd practiced in rooms that didn't smell like beer. Seconds, that was all it took. Bullies love control. They don't love resistance that looks effortless. Sirens started to wail through the trees, blue and red flashing between trunks, getting closer, louder, inevitable. Bryce's mouth twisted into a shaky grin like cops wear a reset button. "You're done," he choked out, laughing through panic. "I called them 10 minutes ago. I told them a crazy black girl attacked us." And there it was, the oldest trick in the rotten system. Turn fear into a story and let the system do the rest. Maya didn't run. She didn't beg. She didn't bargain. She stood in the cold with her breath rising in pale clouds, steady as a compass, because when a bully sets a trap on someone who came prepared to document the hunt, who's really caught?
The woods didn't welcome the cops. They erupted for them. Tires shredding frozen mud, cruiser doors snapping open, deputies spilling out with hands hovering near holsters like this was the part of the night they'd been waiting to star in. Headlights cut through smoke and breath and pine, painting the scene in the simplest story possible. 3 well-fed boys from the town's upper shelves groaning on the ground, and 1 black girl standing over them in a torn, cheap costume, like she'd been dragged out here for public display. And at the center of it all came Sheriff Dean Wexler, the kind of man who didn't need facts when he already had a schedule. Sunday golf with Bryce Halston's father, Monday power lunch with donors, Tuesday keeping the peace, which mostly meant keeping the hierarchy intact. The narrative wrote itself before his boots even touched the mud. Didn't it always? Bryce didn't waste the opening. He crawled toward the deputies like a wounded prince returning to his guards, cradling his wrist, tears performing on cue. "Help, oh God, help me," he choked out, loud enough to make sure everyone heard the version he wanted printed. Then the line that always works when the system is hungry for an excuse. He painted Maya Rivers as the threat, the animal, the problem that needed to be put down before she did something. He didn't mention the bucket. He didn't mention the trap. He didn't mention the hands that grabbed first. He didn't have to. Wexler's eyes flicked once, took in the torn red costume, the dark skin, the boys on the ground, and landed exactly where the town expected them to land. "Freeze!" Wexler roared, drawing his service weapon and leveling it at Maya's chest like he'd been waiting all his life to find the right target for his righteousness. "On the ground, now, or I will drop you." No questions, no search for context, no curiosity, just the old magic trick, turn protect and serve into aim and assume. Maya didn't flinch at the gun. She didn't plead. She didn't throw her innocence into the air like confetti and hope a man like Wexler would catch it. That's what civilians did when they still believed the system was listening. Maya moved with terrifying slowness instead, controlled, deliberate, like every motion had already been rehearsed under harsher lights than these. She dropped to her knees in the mud, fingers interlaced behind her head, elbows out, eyes forward, a textbook surrender, disciplined enough to make the deputies uneasy because it didn't look like fear, and fear was what they wanted, wasn't it? Wexler screamed, "Don't move," anyway, because it's hard to feel powerful if the person obeying you isn't trembling, then rushed in, holstered his weapon, and drove his weight into her like she was the crime scene. Mud swallowed her cheek, cold bit her skin. The cuffs snapped on too tight, biting into her wrists, because restraint wasn't the goal, ownership was. "You picked a wrong town to start trouble in, girl," Wexler hissed near her ear, and the word girl carried the kind of history that doesn't need a textbook to be understood. And there it was, the rotten little theater St. Jude always staged when it needed to protect its favorites. Brock Renner and Jace Mallory were treated like injured heirs. Bryce got the blanket, the paramedic, the gentle loises, the soft hands. Maya got metal, mud, and a shove. As she was dragged toward the cruiser, she caught Bryce's face through the flashing lights. Pain on the surface, victory underneath, a grin so sick it looked like devotion. He mouthed something at her, ownership masquerading as triumph, because boys like him don't just want to win, they want you to know you're trapped inside their story. Wexler jammed Maya into the back seat hard enough to make the doorframe bite, then slammed the door and sealed her in the cage. The interior smelled of stale coffee and old sweat, like yesterday's arrogance never fully aired out. Blue and red lights stuttered across the trees, making the woods look like a crime scene, even though the crime had already been committed long before the sirens arrived. Most teenagers would have been hyperventilating in that back seat. Maya leaned her head against the vinyl and went still, listening, not to the deputies congratulating themselves, not to Bryce's performance outside, but to the quietest sound of all, the real siren, the one nobody could see. Hidden deep in her braid behind her left ear, the recorder sat there like a tiny witness with perfect memory, swallowing every word, every threat, every practiced lie. Wexler thought he'd just delivered the trouble to the station. Bryce thought he'd just flipped the town back into its default setting. Neither of them noticed the twist, because they never do. Sometimes the system doesn't arrest the victim. Sometimes it drives the Trojan horse straight through its own gates.
The interrogation room at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Station wasn't built to find truth. It was built to grind it down. A windowless concrete box that smelled like stale coffee, bleach, and old despair, with one fluorescent bulb buzzing overhead like an insect trapped in glass, throwing a sickly yellow glare across a metal table and a chair bolted to the floor. Maya Rivers sat cuffed to that chair, her torn, muddy red costume looking almost obscene against the institutional gray, like the system itself wanted the contrast, humiliation on the body, authority on the walls. Sheriff Dean Wexler walked in and didn't bother with small talk or procedure. He closed the heavy steel door, crossed to the corner, and reached up to the security camera. One deliberate click, the red recording light died. And just like that, the room got smaller. Didn't it always? "We're off the record now," Wexler said, voice thick with menace, like he enjoyed the sound of his own permission. He slammed a stack of paperwork onto the table. The echo cracked through the concrete like a gunshot in a basement. "Sign it," he ordered, already writing the ending for her. Full confession, aggravated assault, intent to kill, possession of a deadly weapon. Then he's weaned in with a smirk that belonged on a courtroom sketch of a corrupt man, adding one more charge designed to rot her reputation from the inside out, the kind of accusation that makes people stop listening before you even speak. He looked at the torn costume and let his eyes do what his mouth didn't have to say. A black girl in the woods, dressed like that, must have been asking for it, right? That's the fantasy the rotten system sells itself so it can sleep at night. Maya glanced at the paper and then back up at him, calm enough to make his power feel less certain. "I won't sign a work of fiction," she said. "Not loud, not pleading, just flat, like a diagnosis." Wexler's face darkened. He unclipped a heavy, extendable baton and snapped it open with a sharp, metallic shank, tapping it against his palm in a slow rhythm meant to hypnotize fear into obedience. He called her what men like him always called girls like her when the camera's off, language that reduces a human being to a stereotype and a target in the same breath, and he stepped closer until his shadow swallowed the tabletop. "You heard a Halston in this town," he hissed, like the last name was a badge, a weapon, a verdict. "That's a death sentence." He raised the baton slightly, casual as a man picking up a tool, and promised to help her hold the pen if she didn't cooperate. The threat wasn't subtle. It didn't have to be. This was the part of the process where the system stops pretending it's neutral and starts acting like it owns you. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She met his gaze with eyes colder than the ice water that had hit her in the woods, and when she spoke, it wasn't emotion, it was law. "Under the Sixth Amendment, I am entitled to counsel," she said, voice steady, precise, "and I am entitled to a phone call." Wexler paused and then barked out a laugh, cruel, dismissive, like constitutional rights were a cute little hobby for people who didn't understand how this town worked. "Go ahead," he sneered, tossing a cheap landline across the table. "Call whoever you want. By the time anyone shows up, you'll be processed and buried." He leaned against the wall and twirled the baton like a man waiting for tears. He expected begging. He expected panic. He expected the scholarship girl to finally crack into the role they'd assigned her. Maya lifted the receiver with cuffed hands and didn't dial her parents. She didn't dial a local lawyer. She punched a 10-digit sequence like she was entering a code to a locked door, and then her voice changed, not louder, not harsher, just different. The high school girl vanished. The soldier took the wheel. "Authorization code Alpha Zulu Sierra 9, she said, clear as a radio call. "Location, Lincoln County Sheriff's Station. Status, unlawful detention, coercive interrogation, camera intentionally disabled. Officer hostile and non-compliant." Wexler's smirk twitched. "Who the hell are you talking to?" he muttered, still trying to keep his world intact. Then the voice on the other end crackled through the receiver, crisp, official, not impressed by small-town theater. "Code confirmed, identity verified. Cadet Maya Rivers, hold your position, remain calm, do not sign anything. State Police Internal Affairs and our liaison are en route. Turn recording back on if possible."
Silence fell like a curtain. Wexler's face drained so fast he looked carved out of chalk. The baton suddenly seemed heavier in his hand, slippery with sweat he didn't want to admit was there. Maya hung up gently, like she had all the time in the world, and looked at him with an expression that wasn't triumph, it was inevitability. "You might want to turn that camera back on, Sheriff," she said softly. "You're going to want a witness for what happens next." And from beyond the concrete walls, a low, thumping vibration began to roll through the floor. Distant at first, then louder, closer, rhythmic, rotor blades chewing the night air like something big was coming. And this time the system wasn't arriving to save the Halstons. It was arriving to watch the sheriff explain why he thought the Constitution had an off switch.
The styrofoam cup on the metal table didn't just rattle. It danced. Tiny hops, frantic shivers, like even cheap plastic knew when power was changing hands. The low thump that started during Maya's call swelled into a roar that made the concrete feel thin. Ceiling tiles trembled. Dust sifted down in lazy little drifts. Sheriff Dean Wexler backed away from the table without meaning to, eyes flicking to the blinds as if a window could bargain for him. Then the night outside detonated into blinding white. High-intensity floodlights slammed through the slats, hard, surgical, merciless, washing the dingy room in a brightness so violent it felt like exposure. Rotor wash battered the building, windows rattling in their frames, the whole station suddenly sounding like it regretted every lie it had ever sheltered. Wexler's hand hovered near his gun the way scared men reached for symbols, not solutions. His mouth moved. Nothing useful came out. A crash from the front lot cut through everything, twisting metal, a fence giving up its spine. Two matte up-armored Suburbans with no plates punched through the chain-link perimeter like it was tissue paper and slid to a stop just shy of the entrance. For a heartbeat, Wexler looked like his brain was searching for a rule book where this made sense. There wasn't one. The heavy steel door to the interrogation room exploded open with a kick that dented the wall, and 6 operators poured in like a single organism. Black armor, ballistic helmets, movements synchronized with the kind of calm that doesn't come from bravery, it comes from training. Laser sights stitched red dots across Wexler's chest. He froze. The baton slipped from his fingers and clattered on the concrete, loud as shame. "Don't shoot," he yelped, backing into the wall, palms up, suddenly remembering what compliance looked like when the barrel wasn't pointed at someone he thought the town wouldn't miss. The team didn't even bother to look at him twice. His status updated in real time. No longer threat, no longer authority, just furniture with a badge. The team leader stepped forward, a hulking figure with captain's bars on his chest rig. His posture shifted the moment his eyes landed on Maya, like a switch flipping from breach mode to duty. "Secure the perimeter," he snapped to his unit, then reached past the table with a key that didn't ask permission and unlocked Maya's cuffs with a gentle click. The metal fell away. Maya rose, rubbing her wrists once, calm and controlled, as if pain was just another data point. The captain came to attention, crisp, sharp, respectful. He didn't see a crazy black girl in a torn costume. He saw a cadet who had followed protocol while a small-town tyrant tried to rewrite reality with a pen. "Cadet Rivers," he said, voice low and steady. "Captain Elias Vance, we received your distress signal. The general is waiting at the base. Apologies for the delay." Maya returned the salute perfectly, spine straight, chin level, like dignity was something you wore under everything else. "At ease, Captain," she answered. "Thank you for the extraction." Wexler watched, mouth open, eyes blinking too fast. His brain couldn't process the image he'd been trained not to allow. The girl he'd dismissed, threatened and racially reduced, being saluted by someone with real authority. He tried to grab the narrative pack with the last scraps of his old confidence. "She assaulted," he started, voice weak, reaching for the comfort of accusation. Captain Vance turned slowly, and the look he gave Wexler wasn't anger. It was disgust, pure, precise, like stepping in something you can't believe was left on the floor. "Sheriff," Vance said, quiet and lethal, "you are detaining a federal officer under false pretenses."
He let the silence do its job, then added, "Say one more word and I will have you arrested for obstruction. Do I make myself clear?" Wexler nodded too fast. Sweat ran down his face. His hands shook like they'd finally remembered consequences. He reached for his coffee cup to steady himself, fingers numb, and the cup slipped, hit the floor, burst into a brown puddle of lukewarm liquid that spread like a cheap stain under fluorescent light. Maya didn't even glance at it. She stepped over the spill as if it wasn't worth the energy of contempt, and walked past the cowering sheriff without giving him the one thing he still wanted, her attention. Outside, the cold night air bit hard. The helicopter hovered above, spotlight following her like the truth finally learned how to aim. Local deputies stood in the lot with weapons on the ground, hands on their heads, watched over by the rest of the unit, smaller now, quieter now, stripped of the confidence that only exists when the victim is powerless and the story is pre-written. Maya climbed into the back of the armored SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in safety with a final, satisfying thud. As the convoy pulled out, past the shredded gate, past the broken fence, past the stunned faces of men who'd been so sure the town would protect them, Maya finally let her eyes close. Not because she was relieved, because she was recalibrating. The extraction was over. The real war was just beginning. And somewhere out there, Bryce Halston still thought he was the one setting traps.
The principal's office at St. Jude was built to make teenagers feel small. Heavy mahogany, Persian rugs too expensive to breathe near, oil portraits of dead donors staring down like they still owned the building's spine. But this morning the air was thicker than decorum, thick with panic. Principal Adrian Klein sat behind his desk, dabbing sweat from his bald head with a handkerchief, pretending the room wasn't slipping out of his control. Across from him sat Conrad and Vivian Halston, Bryce's parents, polished, furious, and vibrating with that particular kind of rage that comes from people who believe tuition is a receipt for immunity. In the center, Maya Rivers sat alone in a plain wooden chair, gray sweater, jeans, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look like a student facing expulsion. She looked like a verdict waiting for the defendant to finish talking. "This is an outrage," Conrad Halston snapped, slamming his fist on the desk hard enough to rattle the crystal pen holder. "My son is in the hospital with a fractured wrist and a concussion. He might never throw a football again." Vivian leaned in, voice sharp and trembling, part fear, part performance. "And this animal is sitting here like she's bored. She's a menace, Principal Klein, a violent, unstable criminal from the ghetto. We pay $50,000 a year for safety, not to have our son assaulted by diversity quarters." Diversity quarters, like Maya was a paperwork mistake that learned how to run. Principal Klein cleared his throat and slid a single sheet of heavy cream paper across the desk toward Maya. Expulsion, district attorney, juvenile detention. The words ranged like a tidy little execution. Conrad sneered, leaning forward. "I'll make sure you rot in a cell, little girl. I'll bury you under legal fees so deep your family will be paying me for 3 generations. Maya didn't touch the paper, didn't argue, didn't beg. Her eyes stayed on the oak door behind Klein's desk, like she was listening to a countdown no one else could hear. 3, 2, 1. The door didn't just open, it unsealed. It swung inward with slow, deliberate weight, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop without anyone touching a thermostat. A man stepped through, tall, broad, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like armor, deep espresso skin, close-cropped military hair with silver at the temples. He didn't hurry, he advanced. Principal Klein stood up too fast, chair scraping. "Sir, you can't just, this is a private meeting." The man didn't blink. He walked past Conrad and Vivian as if they were furniture and stopped behind Maya's chair, placing one steady hand on her shoulder. Maya didn't turn. She straightened by a fraction, alignment, not defiance. "I believe," the man said, voice low and calm and heavy enough to sink through the floorboards. "This meeting is about to become very public." Conrad surged to his feet, trying to buy back control with volume. "Who the hell do you think you are? Get out before I call security." The man turned his head slowly, eyes ancient and flat. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Halston," he said softly. "Security is currently occupied in the hallway."
Then he pulled out a thick leather-bound folder and tossed it on the Klein's desk. It landed with a blunt, ominous thud and slid right over the expulsion letter like it was erasing it. "Senator Gideon Rivers," he said, and the title hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Former Lieutenant General, United States Marine Corps." Principal Klein's face drained to ash. "Senator, we didn't know." "You didn't know a lot of things," Rivers cut in, "including who you've been protecting." He opened the folder slowly, the way you open a trap once it's already sprung. Bank transfers, dates, routing numbers, highlighted lines that didn't need drama because they had gravity. "We weren't investigating teenage drama," Senator Rivers said, eyes on Conrad now. "We were investigating you." His finger traced a line, then another. $3 million in transfers from the Halston Trust disguised as charitable donations through the school's development fund. Principal Klein looked like he was trying to swallow his own heartbeat. Rivers kept going, clinical and merciless. Influence purchased, complaints buried, victims silenced, a private institution turned into a fortress for one family's ego. Conrad tried to scoff, couldn't make it stick. "This is inadmissible. You can't prove—" "We have the ledgers," Rivers cut him off. "We have communications, and thanks to last night, we have a clean timeline and recordings that tie misconduct to retaliation." Vivian's breath turned shallow, hands fluttering at her throat like she could fan away consequences. Conrad stared at the pages, hands starting to shake as recognition ate him alive. Numbers he knew, signatures he couldn't deny. Rivers leaned in close, voice low as grave. "You demanded jail time for my daughter. You promised to bury her. By the time federal investigators finish, you'll learn what it feels like to be processed in a system that doesn't care how expensive your suit is." Then he straightened up and looked down at Maya, something rare and private softening his face for a half second. "Report," Maya said. Maya snapped a crisp salute. "Evidence secured, targets identified, mission complete, sir." Rivers returned the salute. "Outstanding work." He turned back to the room. Portraits, rugs, donors, cowards, and gestured once toward the open door where 2 federal agents waited, quiet and ready. "Take them," Rivers said. The office erupted in ugly sounds of people who thought rules were for other families, but the agents moved anyway because paperwork doesn't care about tantrums. Maya didn't look back at the expulsion letter. She walked out beside her father, posture steady, face unreadable, leaving behind a room that spent years teaching one lesson: the wealthy are untouchable. That morning, the lesson changed.
The image of Conrad Halston getting handcuffed in Principal Adrian Klein's office didn't disappear so much as it sank, like a stone dropped into dark water, pulling Bryce Halston's whole origin story down with it. Because monsters don't usually hatch fully formed. They get built, quietly, repeatedly. One dinner, one lie, one glass thrown at the right face on the right screen. 10 years earlier, the Halston dining room wasn't a room at all. It was a cavern of mahogany and silence, a table long enough to seat 20 people who never truly needed each other, polished so perfectly it reflected the chandelier like a frozen river. 8-year-old Bryce sat at the far end, legs barely reaching the floor, small hands wrapped around silverware like it could protect him from tone. At the head of the table sat Conrad, younger, broader, already rotting from the inside out, half a bottle of expensive scotch beside his plate, the kind of taste people buy when they want their damage to look sophisticated. A television murmured in the corner, running a segment on military promotions and medals, and the camera lingered on a younger Gideon Rivers in uniform, sharp posture, hard eyes, the kind of calm that makes chaos look embarrassed. The anchor's voice poured syrup over the story. Valor, ambush, lives saved, a platoon brought home because one man ran back into the kill zone when everyone else ran away. Conrad watched with a face that didn't move at first. No tears, no awe, just a tightening around the eyes, like hatred was a belt he could cinch whenever he needed to feel in control. Then the tumbler left his hand. Smash! Crystal exploded against the screen, scotch dripping down Rivers' distorted face like amber blood. Bryce flinched so hard his fork clattered. His eyes snapped to his father, wide and searching, the way a child looks at weather and tries to decide if it's safe to go outside. "Dad," was all he managed before Conrad stood, swaying slightly, rage wrapped in expensive fabric. Conrad crossed the room and loomed over the boy like a storm cloud that had learned how to drink. He gripped Bryce's small shoulder too hard, hard enough to teach pain as punctuation, and pointed at the shattered television with a shaking finger. "Look at him," he hissed. "Memorize that face." His voice had that special tremor of drunk certainty, the kind that pretends it's truth because it's loud. "Do you know who that is?" Bryce swallowed and whispered the only answer he had. "Gideon Rivers." Conrad spat the name like it tasted like rust. "He's the reason I don't wear a uniform anymore. He's the reason we have to fight for every scrap." And just like that, the dining room became a classroom, and the lesson wasn't history, it was inheritance. What do you call it when a grown man hands a child a target and calls it tradition? Conrad pulled a chair close, the smell of alcohol rolling off him like heat from an engine. He leaned in, eyes burning with a fanatic's intimacy, planting seeds in a boy who didn't yet have the vocabulary to call it poison. "In Iraq, I was a hero," he said, voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. "I led men, but he abandoned us, left my squad to die in the sand so he could take the glory, sacrificed good men, and when I tried to report him, the system protected him." The system, that word again, always the same excuse. When people like Conrad fail, it's never their fault. It's always a conspiracy, always a betrayal, always someone else standing too tall in a world they're not supposed to enter. But the real story, sealed in paperwork Conrad prayed no one would ever unseal, was uglier and simpler. In Iraq, Sergeant Halston didn't lead. He panicked. When his squad was pinned down, he ran. He deserted his post and left people behind, including men he later pretended were the reason for everything. And it was Captain Gideon Rivers who ran back into the kill zone anyway, dragging the wounded out one by one, doing the job Conrad claimed as his own. Rivers didn't ruin Conrad's career. Rivers spared him a court-martial for cowardice, gave him the soft exit, the quiet discharge, the chance to disappear with his dignity still technically intact. Mercy, wrapped in paperwork. Conrad repaid it the only way a small man knows how, with a lifetime of resentment, dressed up as grievance, served cold at the dinner table. Back in that mahogany cavern, Conrad's grip tightened until Bryce winced. Then the speech came, the paranoid hymn that has raised 1,000 bullies and called them leaders. "Listen to me," he whispered, eyes wild with certainty he hadn't earned. "The world is changing. They're coming for us. They want our money, our women, our spot at the head of the table." He poured another drink with a shaking hand, the liquid sloshing like an accusation. "Men like Rivers think they're better than us. If you ever see one of them trying to stand taller than you cut them down. Not policy, not principle, just racism with a dress shirt and a family crest. You remind them of their place," he said, like it was a duty, like cruelty was a birthright. "You never let them win, because if they win, we lose everything." And there it was, the secret engine inside Bryce's future. Fear disguised as entitlement, shame disguised as supremacy, a father handing a son a script and telling it was honor. Bryce nodded slowly, absorbing it all like a sponge absorbed spilled scotch, quietly, completely, without understanding the stain it would leave. He didn't see a drunk, broken man trying to outrun his own cowardice. He saw his father, a wronged hero, a king. He felt the weight of a duty he didn't understand, and he promised it like a child promising bedtime. "I won't let them win, Dad." Conrad smiled, a thin, cruel curve that wasn't warmth, just approval. "That's my boy. We're kings. Don't you ever forget it." The memory snapped shut like a folder being closed on a life.
Present day, Bryce lay in a private hospital room, an arm in a cast, the sterile smell of disinfectant replacing the old scotch and mahogany. The wall-mounted TV ran the news with the same calm rhythm it always uses to describe someone else's collapse. A headline crawled across the bottom in bold red: "Local businessman Conrad Halston arrested for fraud and hate crimes." Bryce stared at the screen as footage showed his father being shoved into a police van, small now, older than Bryce had ever allowed himself to see, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The king looked terrified. The hero who taught him to hate looked like a man caught stealing his own myth. Something in Bryce's face shifted, not sympathy yet, just a sickening jolt of realization. Every insult he'd thrown at Maya Rivers, every trap, every sneer, every performance of power, built on a coward's lie. He hadn't been defending family honor. He'd been living inside his father's insecurity like it was a mansion, only to find out it was a set, cheap walls, painted gold. And now the cameras were here. Outside the hospital, media vans rolled in like vultures with tripods. The court of public opinion was about to convene, and it doesn't accept "my dad told me so" as a defense. So what was Bryce now? Victim? Villain? Or just the collateral damage of a rotten inheritance finally being dragged into the light?
Conrad Halston might have been sitting in a federal holding cell, belt gone, shoelaces gone, dignity on layaway, but a man with $50 million in liquid assets is never actually defenseless. Bars don't stop him. They just force him to switch weapons. No fists, no guns, just a thing that melts reality in modern America with a smile: the media. By Tuesday morning, the story had flipped with hurricane speed, not because the truth changed, but because someone paid to move the camera. Conrad's legal team didn't wait for court. They went straight to the only courtroom that matters when you're rich and panicking: public opinion. Leading the charge was Wyatt Kincaid, nicknamed the Great White Shark because he doesn't argue cases, he devours people. And he did what sharks do. He smelled blood in the water and made sure the audience only saw what he wanted them to see. A clip hit every major outlet like a coordinated ambush: exclusive, breaking, disturbing. The footage came from Bryce Halston's phone at the bonfire, but it had been surgically edited. Clean cuts, neat omissions, a story rewritten with scissors. The first part, the ice water dump, the forced costume, the cornering, the harassment, the moment where a drunk boy decided consent was optional, gone, deleted, erased like it never happened. The video America got started at the exact wrong second, which is the oldest trick in propaganda. Begin where the victim finally moves. On millions of screens, the opening shot was Maya Rivers grabbing Bryce's wrist, then a crying white boy on his knees, then a blur of violence and firelight. Maya strong, terrified, efficient. Brock Renner collapsing, Jace Mallory dropping, the scene flashing like a war reel. Without context, it didn't read like self-defense. It read like a massacre. And the country loves a simple villain, especially when the villain is a black girl who didn't know her place. The reaction went nuclear. Conservative talk radio lit up the heartland with the same script, dressed in different voices. Look at the technique. That's not a fight. That's training. A primetime pundit replayed the slow-motion frames like he was studying a predator on a nature documentary. "Military-grade aggression," he shouted, as if pain only matters when the right people feel it. "A trained killer walking among our children," he said, and the studio audience nodded like fear was evidence. Headlines followed: brutal, slick, irresponsible. General's daughter goes rogue. West Point weaponizes teen against civilians. The monster of St. Jude. Her face became a banner people could throw rocks at from the safety of their couches. And the internet, where nuance goes to die, turned into a firing squad. Comment sections filled with panic and racism and an old familiar vocabulary that always shows up when a black kid refuses to be fragile on command. Animal, thug, savage, lock her up, make an example. They demanded her imprisonment. They demanded her father's resignation. They demanded the world be put back in the shape that makes them comfortable. Because how dare she survive on camera? In her small apartment, Maya drew the blinds tight and let the silence sit heavy on the table like an unpaid bill.
television stayed off. She didn't need it. The noise was already inside the walls. In front of her lay the tiny recording device she'd hidden in her grade, the grain of rice insurance policy, the ace she'd been counting on. The plan was simple. Upload the full audio, let the truth do what truth does. She tapped it once. Nothing. No blink, no green light. She plugged it into her laptop. Device not recognized. She tried again. Still dead. Ice water and beer hadn't just been humiliation. It had been an accidental tactical strike. The freeze and soak had shorted the delicate electronics. The audio was corrupted. The evidence was a corpse. And for the first time since St. Jude, a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Not fear of a fight, fear of a story. She had the truth, but the Houstons had the video, and the world had already picked its favorite version. In Washington, Senator Gideon Rivers was suddenly under siege. Political enemies didn't waste a second. An ethics investigation bloomed overnight, all smirks and headlines, accusing him of running some shadow militia, using his child as an instrument. He couldn't defend her publicly without handing them the cover-up narrative on a silver platter. The system loves that trick, too. If you speak, you're guilty. If you stay quiet, you're guilty. If you're black and unbroken, you're dangerous by default. So Maya was alone in the loudest way possible. Most 17-year-olds would have collapsed into their phones, crying on live video, begging strangers to be fair, typing frantic paragraphs into a comment section that was never going to read. Maya didn't pick up a phone. She picked up a gym bag, because when you can't control the narrative, you control the only thing they can't edit, your discipline. An hour later, she was in the basement of a run-down boxing gym on the south side of town, far from St. Jude's manicured lawns and velvet seat morality plays. The air smelled like old sweat and leather and effort. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The heavy bag hung there like a judge that never blinks. Maya wrapped her hands and went to work. Left hook, right cross, pivot, uppercut. The sound was rhythmic thunder, control, precise, punishing. Every punch was an answer to a lie Wyatt Kincaid had polished for the evening news. Every strike was a refusal to become what they named her. She wasn't flailing, she wasn't spiraling, she was sharpening. And that's the part the public doesn't know how to process. Rage can be messy or it can be disciplined. Maya chose discipline because discipline is a language liars hate. It doesn't perform, it doesn't plead, it just keeps showing up. From the office doorway, the gym owner watched her. Elias Crow, picktooth in his mouth, eyes that had seen fighters come and go for 50 years. He'd seen the clip, he'd heard the anchors, he'd read the comments, he'd been told what she was, and now he was watching what she actually was. Not a monster, not a headline, a young woman turning a hurricane of injustice into controlled kinetic energy, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Maya stopped the bag with a gloved hand, chest heaving, sweat cutting paths down her face like the body was trying to rinse off the world. In her mind, she saw Bryce's smug face, the same face now getting sympathy from millions while he lay in a hospital bed, tearful interviews soft-lit like a redemption arc. Isn't it funny how the camera can make a predator look like a wounded deer? Elias grunted from the doorway, voice rough like sandpaper. They think they got you surrounded, kid. Maya turned, eyes dark and unreadable, tape coming off her knuckles to reveal bruises underneath, real ones, not the kind edited into a narrative. They do, she said, steady, no self-pity. They controlled the ground. They controlled the airwaves. They had the high ground. Elias tilted his head. So what now? Maya took a drink of water and looked at herself in the dusty mirror. The world saw a criminal. She saw a soldier in a foxhole taking fire from every direction, still checking her compass. I dig in. Truth has a way of surfacing. You just have to survive long enough to see it. She didn't know how she'd prove it yet. She didn't know what door would crack first. She only knew she wouldn't break. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and indifferent, blanketing the city with white like a cover story. And somewhere else, in a quiet bedroom lit by a laptop glow, a terrified boy named Jordan Pike sat staring at a memory card, the unedited soul of that night sitting in his palm like a live grenade. He hadn't uploaded it, not yet. He was shaking. He was thinking about what happens to kids who tell the truth in rotten systems. He was thinking about Bryce Houston. He was thinking about Maya Rivers. He was thinking maybe for the first time in his life about what side he wanted to be on when the story finally stopped being edited. The siege had begun. The countersuit was in motion. And the one thing Conrad Houston couldn't buy was the moment a witness decides to speak. While the outside world was screaming into microphones and comment sections, the St. Jude Library stayed dead quiet. Oak shelves towering like old judges, dust floating through fluorescent light. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, it interrogates you. In the deepest corner of the biography aisle sat Jordan Pike, folded into a chair like he was trying to disappear into the upholstery. Small, pale, left eye twitching like a broken metronome. Jordan was never one of the kings, not rich enough to be protected, not big enough to be feared, just useful. The bag carrier, the drink runner, the kid who held the camera so the bullies could replay themselves later and laugh like it was a sport. In his hand, pinched between sweaty fingers, was a tiny black SD card, no bigger than a stamp, heavy like a verdict. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the edited clip on the news. Maya Rivers as the monster. Bryce Halston as the victim. America nodding along because it loves a simple story and hates a complicated truth, especially when the truth has dark skin and doesn't beg. Jordan knew what the public didn't. He'd been there in the frozen mud. He'd filmed the bucket. He'd heard the slurs. He'd watched Bryce turn a human being into a joke and call it fun. The full video sat in his palm like a live grenade, but fear glued him to the chair. If he dropped that file, Bryce wouldn't just bully him. Bryce would erase him. And the Halston money, it wouldn't even look like a crime. It would look like consequences, a smashed reputation, a ruined family business, a boy quietly strangled by a system that smiles while it does it. It's heavy, isn't it? The voice came from the shadows, calm enough to make it worse. Jordan jumped so hard his knee cracked the table. The SD card slipped, skittering to the carpet like a fleeing insect. He scrambled for it, too late. Maya stepped out between the shelves like she'd been built out of silence itself. Hood up, posture unmistakable. Not frantic, not hunted, controlled. The kind of presence that tells you security cameras are just decorations if the person walking past them knows what she's doing. Jordan's throat locked. His lungs forgot their job. "Maya, I didn't—" "Relax," she said, and her voice wasn't angry. That was the strange part. It was steady, almost gentle. She crouched, picked up the SD card, looked at it for a beat, then placed it on the table between them like it was evidence in a courtroom. "You're the cameraman," she said, flat and accurate. "You always have been." Jordan stared at his shoes like they could hide him. Maya didn't loom. She didn't circle. She didn't bark like Bryce. She pulled up a chair and sat across from him, eye level, equal height, equal air, equal gravity. "You watch through a lens because it makes you feel safe, like you're not really part of it." Jordan swallowed. His voice cracked when it finally came out. "You'll kill me. You don't know what Bryce is like. If I release that video, my life is over." He meant it. The panic in his chest wasn't dramatic. It was survival math. Maya held his gaze without flinching. "Your life isn't over," she said. "It's just beginning. But you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be while you're living it." Then she reached into her pocket. Jordan tensed, because that's what bullying trains you to do, brace for impact. But she didn't pull a weapon. She pulled out a brass coin, old and worn smooth at the edges, like it had been rubbed by anxious fingers for decades. She slid it across the table. It spun once, twice, then settled in front of him with a soft, metallic kiss. "That's a challenge coin," Maya said. "My grandfather carried it in Vietnam." Jordan's eyes dropped to the engraving. "The truth shall set you free." Maya's voice stayed low, cinematic, the way a confession sounds when it's finally honest. One night, his commanding officer ordered him to burn a village. They suspected enemy activity. That's how evil talks when it wants to sound official. Maya let that sit. He refused. He was threatened with court-martial. He was terrified, but he knew burning that village was wrong. Jordan's twitch slowed like his nervous system was listening. He earned that coin not for fighting the enemy, but for fighting his own fear. And because he did, people lived. Jordan blinked hard. Tears gathered, embarrassing and unstoppable. I'm not a soldier. I'm just nobody. Maya didn't soften the truth. She sharpened it. You're the most powerful person in this town right now because you're holding the truth. And your silence is heavier than any lie Bryce has ever told. She stood up, and Jordan's heart lurched because she thought she was going to take the card and force the choice. She didn't. She left it right there on the table, next to the coin. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Then she pulled her hood higher, eyes calm, voice colder. I can't force you. I won't bully you. That's Bryce's way. She paused, just long enough to land the blade. But you already know, if you destroy that card, you'll be carrying it for the rest of your life. And then she was gone, back into the stacks, swallowed by shelves and dust and the quiet machinery of the library. Jordan sat alone with two objects in front of him, a coin and a card, metal and plastic, past and present. One weighed nothing, both could change everything. He picked up the coin. It felt cold, solid, real. He thought about Bryce calling him Lens Boy, thought about the way Bryce laughed when he slapped Maya like the whole world was his stage, thought about how easy it is to be cruel when you think the system will clap for you. Jordan's hand stopped shaking, not because he wasn't afraid, because he was done being owned by it. He pulled out his laptop, inserted the SD card. The screen glowed like an altar. He opened his email, found the contact for Senator Gideon Rivers' legal counsel, and typed a subject line with fingers that finally obeyed him. The full video. His cursor hovered for one heartbeat, the last breath before a plunge. He squeezed the brass coin in his left hand until it hurt. Click. Send. Jordan slumped back, and the weight that had been crushing his chest for days cracked and slid off like ice breaking on a river.
The Suffolk County Courthouse felt less like a building and more like a fuse. The hearing room was jammed past capacity. Wool suits pressed shoulder to shoulder, press badges swinging like little shields, faces hot with judgment, the air wet with too many bodies and that special American hunger for a public takedown. To anyone watching from the back, this wasn't a preliminary hearing. It was a ritual. Pick your villain, pick your victim, pretend it's about safety. And guess who the room had already decided to fear before the judge even sat down? On one side of the aisle sat the Halstons, arranged like a portrait of wounded nobility. Mr. Halston, out on bail, kept a protective arm around Bryce, who wore a soft blue sweater and a spotless white sling, playing injured innocence so perfectly it almost deserved an award. Their attorney sat beside them, buttoned and camera-ready, smiling the way predators do when they know the crowd is already hungry. He didn't look like a man preparing for a hearing. He looked like a man preparing for a headline. On the other side sat Maya Rivers, alone at the defense table, back straight, hands folded, no trembling performance, no desperate please believe me eyes. Behind her, in the first row of the gallery, Senator Gideon Rivers didn't shake hands or feed the microphones outside. He didn't posture like a politician. He sat like a commander watching a battlefield, waiting for the enemy to step into their own trap. The room buzzed with whispers that sounded suspiciously like the same old story. Scholarship girl, trouble girl, what did she expect? These people, she's dangerous, she doesn't belong.
Funny how belonging gets defined by money and skin tone and enforced by edited video clips. Judge Malcolm Reeves, late 60s, stern reputation, eyes like cold steel, banged his gavel and cracked the room into silence. The sound wasn't a request, it was a warning. He announced the purpose of the hearing in a voice that left no room for theater, whether there was sufficient evidence to charge the defendant with aggravated assault. Then he looked toward the prosecution side and gave the nod. Counsel, proceed. Halston's attorney stood, buttoned his jacket like he was closing a deal, then turned just slightly to make sure the cameras caught his best angle. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth as syrup, the facts are simple. Of course they were. They always are when you remove the parts that make your client look like a predator. He spoke of a star athlete, an honor student who had been brutally attacked. He spoke of Maya as a trained combatant, a danger walking among children, a threat that had to be contained. He pointed at her like she was evidence of decay. He called it sadism. He called it a massacre. He called it everything except what it actually was, a girl cornered, humiliated, and violated who refused to die quietly for someone else's entertainment. The crowd murmured along, relieved to be told what to think. Heads shook in disgust, eyes rolled toward Maya like the verdict was already printed, because the clip had been everywhere. 30 seconds looped to death, cut to start at the wrong second, the moment Maya grabbed Bryce's wrist. No lead up, no trap, no beer bucket, no coercion, no slurs, no hand on her body, just impact, just bones, just the image of a black girl not acting afraid, which, let's be honest, terrifies certain people more than any bruise ever could. Who needs truth when you got a narrative? Judge Reeves turned toward the defense. Response, he barked, already irritated by the smell of spectacle. Maya's attorney, a quiet, intense woman from the Army JAG Corps, stood without flourish. No speeches, no emotional pleading, no apology tour. She simply held up a small flash drive between two fingers like it was a key. Your Honor, she said, voice clean and sharp, the prosecution's case rests on a heavily circulated clip. The defense moves to enter Exhibit A, the unedited, raw footage of the incident, time-stamped and verified. Halston's attorney sprang up. Objection! Overruled! Judge Reeves snapped, cutting him off like swatting a fly. If it's relevant, I want to see it. Play the footage. The lights dimmed. The projector whirred. A screen descended behind the bench. The room tightened. It always does right before the truth walks in, because the truth has a nasty habit of making people feel stupid for what they believed 5 minutes earlier. The video started not with violence, but with context. It began earlier. It began with Maya arriving at the bonfire in winter clothes, calm, contained, not looking for trouble, not begging to fit in. Then the trap sprang, the bucket of ice water and cheap beer dumping on her like a punishment delivered by boys who'd never been punished a day in their lives. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. You could hear the collective mind of the room trying to backpedal. Then the audio hit, Bryce's voice, clear, unmistakable, mocking her, calling her the charity case, turning cruelty into comedy because he assumed the system would laugh with him. The video showed the coercion, Bryce forcing a freezing girl into a humiliating costume under threat of hypothermia. The older women in the gallery covered their mouths. Some men shifted hard in their seats, suddenly allergic to their own earlier certainty. It's amazing how fast "she's dangerous" turns into silence when the camera shows what actually happened. It's amazing how quickly people stop cheering when they realize they've been cheering for a predator. And then it happened, the moment the edited clip had carefully amputated. Bryce cornered her. He loomed. He spoke like her dignity belonged to him. And in clean, high-definition detail, the entire courtroom watched him slap her body with a wet, degrading smack, then brag into the camera like he just proved something. You could feel the air leave the room. Bryce sank lower in his chair, color draining from his face. Mr. Halston shut his eyes like closing them could erase the screen. Now the wrong second finally arrived, Bryce grabbing her wrist. But with the context established, it didn't look like a monster attacking. It looked like a woman defending her body, defending her life, defending the one thing bullies always try to take first: control. The strikes that followed were fast, precise, clinical, not rage-flailing, not showboating. In the back row, a few elderly veterans in VFW caps leaned forward, eyes narrowing. They didn't see chaos, they saw technique. One whispered loud enough to cut through the dead silence. That's a textbook disarm. The video ended with Maya standing over the aftermath, torn costume strap slipping to reveal the West Point crest and the motto, Duty, Honor, Country, a detail that landed like a hammer in a room full of people who'd been comfortable calling her thug minutes ago. The screen went black. Nobody breathed. 10 seconds of pure, stunned silence, the kind of quiet that tastes like shame. Then a clap started, slow, rhythmic, respectful. It came from the veterans first, like recognition, not celebration. Then another person stood, then another. Within moments, the gallery was on its feet, not cheering violence, but acknowledging reality. Maya had been outnumbered, targeted, sexualized, and racially baited, and she refused to be reduced into the role they'd written for her. Judge Reeves banged his gavel again, not to stop the applause, but to regain control of a room that had just watched the truth erase an entire narrative. Judge Reeves turned his gaze toward Bryce with the kind of disgust that doesn't need profanity. He spoke to the attorney first, voice trembling with contained rage. "Counsel," he said, "you brought this into my courtroom." The lawyer began to stammer, papers shuffling like a man searching for a hole in the floor. Judge Reeves didn't give him one. "The defendant's actions fall under self-defense," he ruled, clear and final. "All charges are dismissed with prejudice." Then he shifted, colder. "And based on what I have just witnessed, I am recommending the district attorney open an immediate investigation into Bryce Halston for sexual battery and filing a false police report. Get him out of my sight." Case closed. Maya didn't smile. She didn't bask. She stood, buttoned her jacket, and turned to Senator Gideon Rivers. He nodded once, small gesture, enormous pride. Across the aisle, Bryce slumped forward until his forehead hit the polished table with a dull, ugly thud. The cameras clicked like insects, but now they weren't photographing the golden boy. They were documenting the rot under the gold. Maya walked toward the exit, and the crowd parted for her. Not out of fear this time, but out of something rarer in that town: respect. Bryce lifted his head and watched her go, realizing the broken wrist was nothing. The shield of money had cracked, the armor of reputation had fallen away, and for the first time in his life, there was no one left to edit the truth for him.
The courtroom doors blew open, and the circus poured out like it had been waiting behind the walls all along. Cameras, flash bursts, microphones shoved forward like spears looking for blood. Reporters shouted questions they didn't actually want answered, because answers are messy and spectacle is clean. Mr. Halston barreled through the swarm with Bryce tucked under his arm like a human shield, one hand clamped on his son's good shoulder, jaw set in that familiar expression of wealthy outrage, the face of a man who believes consequences are for other people. "No comment," he snapped. "We're appealing. This is a miscarriage of justice." He said it loud enough for the cameras to taste it. He marched toward the glass doors of the lobby, expecting the usual ritual outside: a waiting car, a quiet escape route, a phone call that turns disaster into inconvenience, because that's how his world had always worked. Spend money, pull strings, rewrite reality. But when they stepped onto the wide stone courthouse steps, reality was waiting first. The limousine was gone. In its place, 4 black government sedans lined up like punctuation marks. A dozen agents in windbreakers with those 3 letters that don't negotiate. Not local cops, not friendly deputies, not the kind of law you can invite to a fundraiser and tame with a handshake. These men moved like wolves that had finally been given permission to enter the gated pasture. "Mr. Halston," a lead agent called, voice cutting clean through the press noise. Mr. Halston stopped dead.
For a second, his face tried to hold the old shape: indignation, authority, entitlement. "Who are you?" he barked. "Get out of my face." The agent didn't blink. He stepped forward, badge flashing like a hard sunrise. "Special Agent Declan Rourke, Financial Crimes Division. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and federal bribery." The words landed like a trap door. Mr. Halston tried to spit contempt, but it came out thin. "This is ridiculous. Call my lawyer." Rourke's tone didn't change. "Your lawyer has been indicted as a co-conspirator. Turn around, hands behind your back." The press gasped like they'd just been handed a better story. Cameras that had been hunting for a soundbite were now broadcasting the fall of an empire live. Bryce's voice came out small, trembling, absurdly young. "Dad, what's happening?" Mr. Halston didn't answer. He couldn't, because the agent slammed him against the hood of the nearest sedan, and the ratchet of handcuffs snapping shut echoed louder than any shout. "You can't do this," he yelled, dignity splintering in real time. "Do you know who I am? I'm a pillar of this community." Rourke leaned in, cold and professional, and began reciting rights like reading a receipt. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The back door opened. Mr. Halston was folded into the seat like any other suspect. The door slammed, and just like that, the pillar became cargo. As the sedan rolled, Mr. Halston pressed his face to the glass, eyes wide, panic bleeding through the cracks, and shouted Bryce's name like yelling could buy time. "Call the bank, get the offshore codes." Except there were no codes that could save him now. Agents moved past Bryce like he was furniture, slapping seizure notices on paperwork, handing him a single sheet that looked harmless until you read it. "Bryce Halston?" another agent asked, voice flat. "This is a notice of asset forfeiture. Your home, your vehicles, and your trust funds have been frozen pending investigation. You'll need to find your own ride home." The convoy pulled away, sirens briefly flaring, and took the money, the protection, the invisible force field that had made Bryce feel immortal. Bryce stood on the sidewalk and watched it vanish, and the crowd of reporters instinctively formed a ring around him. But the eyes weren't admiring anymore, and they weren't afraid either. They were the eyes people have at a car wreck: morbid curiosity, detached fascination, that quiet thrill of watching something expensive break. Bryce scanned for his friends, Brock Renner, Chase Mallory, the boys who had laughed on command and circled like trained dogs. Nowhere. Funny how loyalty evaporates the second it can't be purchased. He looked for his truck. Across the street, it was being loaded onto a tow rig like a dead animal. He looked down at his designer shoes, now scuffed, now dirty, now just shoes, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. The prince costume had been confiscated. He tried to breathe through it. He tried to stand tall through it. He couldn't. "Dad," he choked. And then the facade didn't crack, it collapsed. Bryce didn't roar, he didn't threaten. He dropped to his knees on the cold concrete, like the ground had finally demanded what he owed it. His face crumpled. He started sobbing, ugly, having sobs that shook his whole body. He wailed for his father. He wailed for his truck. He wailed for the life that had been built on other people's fear. "It's not fair," he screamed up at the gray sky, tears streaming, snot running, dignity gone. "It's not fair. You can't do this to me." He sounded like every bully sounds when the system stops laughing with them, like a child screaming because the world refused to stay purchased. Up on the courthouse steps, Maya Rivers watched with her father beside her. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look entertained. Her face stayed impassive, steady, like she was observing what happens when a life built on edited footage meets unedited consequences. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Maya didn't offer Bryce a glance of pity or a final line for his tragedy. She simply turned away, voice quiet, clean, final. "Let's go." And she walked off, leaving Bryce in the spotlight he'd begged for his whole life, finally getting the kind of attention he actually deserved.
The afternoon sun dragged long, bruised shadows across the snow around St. Jude Preparatory Academy, and for once the campus didn't sound like entitlement with a tuition bill. It was quiet, too quiet. The news trucks had peeled off, chasing the FBI convoy that hauled Mr. Halston away like common cargo, and the gates looked suddenly honest. Cold iron, no magic, no protection spell. Maya Rivers stood by the open trunk of a modest rental sedan near the front entrance, folding her wool coat into sharp, precise corners and setting it beside her duffel like she was clearing a forward base, not leaving a school. No nostalgia, no "I'll miss this place," just the clean, mechanical choreography of someone who refuses to be sentimental about a battlefield. "Wait! Hey, you! Stop!" The voice came ragged, cracking with desperation that scraped the air. Maya didn't jump. She didn't flinch. She simply lowered the trunk lid and let the latch click shut, clean and final, like a pistol hammer dropping. Then she turned. Bryce Halston was running toward her across the slushy asphalt, and he didn't look like the prince who'd once tried to turn her into a splash joke. He looked like the ghost of that boy. Hair matted and greasy, Oxford shirt wrinkled, missing a button like even his wardrobe had started resigning. One arm was locked in a white cast and hugged to his chest like a broken wing. He didn't stride anymore. He stumbled. He skidded to a stop a few feet away, gasping, eyes wild and bloodshot, and then he screamed the one question bullies always ask when their world stops protecting them. "Why? Why didn't you say anything?" he shouted, voice bouncing off brick walls that used to echo his laughter. Maya leaned against the car, crossed her arms, and studied him with the calm curiosity you'd give an insect trapped under glass. "Say what, Bryce?" Her tone wasn't angry. That would have been too generous. He waved his good hand toward the horizon like he could point to the moment his life went wrong. "That your dad was a senator, that you were West Point. You let me think you were nobody. You let me think you were poor." Tears welled up, not the kind that come from remorse, but the kind that come from inconvenience. "You tricked me. It's entrapment. If I'd known you had power, I never would have touched you. We could have been friends. We could have ruled this place together." And there it was, the confession hiding inside the complaint. He didn't regret what he did. He regretted doing it to someone who could hit back. Isn't that the whole rotten math of privilege? Maya pushed off the car and stepped into his space with crushing calm, not aggression, certainty. "That is exactly the problem," she said low and smooth. "You only respect power when it comes with a title and a security detail." Bryce stammered, wiping his nose with his sleeve, trying to find a sentence that didn't make him look like what he was. Maya didn't let him. She nodded at his expensive shoes, dirty now, scuffed now, suddenly just leather and ego. "You define yourself by what you own, by your father's money, by the school's crest, by the fear you force into weaker people." Another half step closer, and Bryce shrank back like the air had turned sharp. "But strip it away," she continued, voice cutting like a scalpel. "Strip away the credit cards. Strip away the daddy who pays the judges. Strip away the truck, the jacket, the crowd that laughs on command. What's left?" Bryce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Empty hands, empty answer. Maya's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I don't need my father's name to know my worth," she said. "My value is built on discipline, on honor, on what I can endure." Then she delivered the sentence that hit harder than any punch. "But you, without your father's money, you're nothing. A hollow shell that only feels real when people are afraid of it." Bryce's face crumbled, not because his wrist hurt, but because for the first time in 18 years he saw the number he'd been avoiding, 0. Maya turned away like he had already faded. There was nothing left to say to a ghost. She reached for the driver's door, then stopped. Along the iron fence by the schoolyard stood a silent line of students, maybe 20 of them, the invisible population of St. Jude, scholarship kids, minority kids, the ones with thrift store coats and quiet footsteps, trained to keep their eyes down so Bryce's world wouldn't notice them. No cheering, no signs, just stillness, watching. Among them stood Jordan Pike, the former cameraman, clutching his backpack straps like they were a lifeline. Beside him was a freshman black boy who still wore the posture of someone who'd been shoved into lockers one too many times, shoulders rounded, chin tucked, body trying to disappear.
Maya walked over and stopped in front of him. The wind whipped her braids back. He looked up with awe and fear tangled together. When she reached toward him, he flinched on instinct. That reflex wasn't weakness, it was training, St. Jude's kind. Maya gently took her collar and straightened it, then placed her hands on his shoulders like she was setting a compass. "Stand up," she said softly. The boy hesitated and straightened. He rose like a plant finally given light. "Chin up," Maya added. He lifted his head. Maya looked down the line at all of them and didn't give them a revenge speech. She didn't tell them to swing fists or burn the place down. She gave them something far more dangerous to the system that had fed on their fear. Bryce didn't ride you because he was strong. He rode you because you bent. He needed your fear to feel tall. She tapped the freshman's shoulder once, solid, grounding. No one can ride your back if you stand up straight. Dignity isn't something they hand you. It's something you refuse to give away. Don't let them make you look down. Not ever again. And the shift was subtle, almost invisible. Shoulders squaring, chins lifting, eyes changing from hunted to awake. Jordan stepped forward and pulled a heavy brass coin from his pocket, holding it up like a silent salute. Maya nodded once, a soldier acknowledging an ally without turning it into a performance. Then she walked back to her car. In the rearview mirror, Bryce was still on the pavement, sobbing into his good hand, collapsing under the weight of a world that wouldn't take his father's money as payment anymore. But behind the fence, that line of students stayed upright, unmoving, unbending. The statue was leaving, yet somehow the ground felt steadier than when she arrived. The drive to the private airfield was short, the Massachusetts sky bleeding into violet and blood orange as the sun sank. Maya parked on the tarmac and felt it before she heard it, the air vibrating, the chest-thump rhythm of rotors. A sleek black military helicopter sat idling 100 yards away, blades slicing the cold into a swirling halo of snow. By the open bay door stood her father, Senator Gideon Rivers, heavy trench coat over a suit, posture still carved from years of uniform. He watched her approach through the gale without waving, without theatrics, because he knew the wrong kind of tenderness can sound like doubt. Maya lifted her duffel, walked into the wind, stopped in front of him, and snapped into a clean salute. "Sir," she called over the roar. "Operation complete. Hostiles neutralized. Intelligence secured." Her father returned the salute with the precision of a man who respected her more than a headline. His eyes softened, not pity, not panic, pride edged with steel. "At ease, cadet, you held the line." And simpler than any speech, "Let's go home." Maya climbed aboard and buckled in as the engine pitch rose to a scream. The helicopter lifted, the world shrinking beneath her. Courthouse, station, estates, gatekeepers, bullies, tiny toys against the vast horizon. She touched the eagle crest under her coat and let the truth settle where it belonged. She hadn't won because her father was powerful. She won because when the world tried to push her into the mud, she refused to move. And somewhere back in those woods, in the memory Bryce kept trying to rewrite, his voice still hissed like poison in the cold. "Bet you never had a real Christmas, filthy girl. Let me give you a present you won't forget." He thought humiliation was a weapon. He thought the system would do the rest. But he made the fatal mistake bullies always make.